Now we're in the year 1564. The baby that you can see over there was named William Shakespeare. We don't know the exact day of his birth, but probably was by the end of April. He was the third child, but due to the death of his sisters, he was the eldest. Of 6 children, Gilbert, Joan, Anne, Richard, and the youngest, Edmund. All of this happened on the Elizabethan era, the period of the Queen Elizabeth I, from 1558 to 1603, in the period of English Renaissance in music, literature, and poetry.
Did you know that on this era, women were not allowed to participate on the plays? So men had to play their characters. It almost were rural habits. There were cities. On this time, people were very superstitious. Even they followed gods and spirits about all the stealing. Also, it was night for thieves, because there were very severe punishments, like tortures.
An interesting fact about Shakespeare is that his surname wasn't as we know nowadays. It was always written in a different way. On this period, there were some important discoveries. For example, Johann Sebastian Elcano was the first human to travel around the world in 1522, and also England first colonized the North America coast. And Thomas Harris was the first man ever who made a draw of the moon. An interesting and dirty thing about this era. Water was not clean at all, so they get used to drink wine and ale. They were so dirty, and they usually have a shower once a year. Children were the last to get into the water, so it was black and full of dirt.
We don't know too much about Shakespeare's childhood, but he probably was good at school. At 18 years, he suddenly fell in love with Anne Hathaway, a young and pretty woman, and they were the happiest couple. Not really. Annie was 8 years older than him, and they were usually hiking. However, Shakespeare had to marry her because she was pregnant.
In 1583, Susan, the first daughter of Shakespeare's Anne, was born. And 2 years later, the twins, Judith and Hamlet, were born. Since this moment, we lose him until 1592. Some theories say that probably he was traveling around Europe. In 1591, Henry VI was first written, but Shakespeare started to appear again 1 year later. And he wrote his poem Venus and Adonis. Some years later, in 1996, Hamlet died at the age of 11. In 1596, Shakespeare wrote one of the most important plays of all the time, the beautiful Romeo and Juliet. Probably you think that Romeo and Juliet were 18 or 19. Actually, Juliet was 13. Well, the story begins with 2 young guys who suddenly fell in love. But there was one problem. Their families were enemies. But Romeo and Juliet didn't care about that at all. They were in love and nothing could change it. Juliet had an idea. She was tired of all the problems. So she joined a monk and they pretend Juliet's death. So Romeo decided to kill himself because he couldn't be without Juliet. But Juliet found Romeo dead, so she committed suicide because she preferred the dead before a life without Romeo's love. And finally, there you have the young lovers who died for each other.
Other of his famous plays is Machado or Love, written in 1598-1599. It tells the story of two couples, the lovers Hero and Claudio and Benedict and Beatrice, who pretend to hate each other. The night before Claudio and Hero's wedding, Claudio, Don Pedro, and Don John saw a girl who really looks like Hero, kissing another man. And John convinced Claudio that his future wife was committing adultery. So next day in the wedding, Claudio humiliates Hero, and her family simulates her death. Claudio realized that all that was a plan of Don John, so Claudio was really sorry because Hero's dead, and he agreed to marry with Hero's cousin. But actually it was Hero. On the other hand, Benedict and Beatrice, who at the beginning hate each other, realized that that feeling wasn't another than love.
Hamlet was written between 1600 and 1601. It's a convoluted work in which it shows the most philosophical part of Shakespeare. The main character is Hamlet, and he is the Prince of Denmark. The story starts with the apparition of Hamlet's father, who tells him that he has been assassinated by his brother, who is now married with Hamlet's mother. During the play, Hamlet tries to find out the truth by making the other people think that he was crazy, and by representing his father's death. He is sent to a mental hospital, and there he discusses with her mother, and by mistake, he kills his younger confidant, who was keeping watch on the conversation.
When he comes back home, he goes to his lover's funeral, who has committed suicide, and then is when the famous scene with the skull happens, as well as the monologue of the famous to be or not to be. After that, Hamlet's uncle plans his death. He will be killed in a duel with a poisoned sword. But in the duel, he manages to beat his opponent and kill his uncle, his father murdered. Moreover, he is wounded with the poisoned sword, so he dies at the end. Shakespeare wrote many plays, poems, and stories, but all of them were divided in three groups: tragedies, comedies, and histories. Shakespeare was an amazing actor, and many of his plays were represented on the Globe Theatre. The Globe Theatre burned down in 1613.
Shakespeare finally died on 1616 at the age of 52. Some theories say that he probably died on the month of his birth. There are some people that say that his tomb is cursed. His early child was rarely divided, so Susan received more money than Edith, but Annie only received the second best bed of the house. Did you know that Shakespeare killed around 60 people in all his plays? And did you know that his play Macbeth is represented every 4 hours around the world? and Shakespeare add around 3,000 words to English dictionary.
Shakespeare's plays have been adapted to the cinema and the television many times, but probably Hamlet could be the most important. It has been adapted to the cinema and television in shows like The Simpsons, and the cinema, the most important film that is related to Hamlet will be The Lion King, but in fact is not as the original play because it has a different end. Romeo and Juliet has been adapted to the cinema and television hundreds of times. In films like West Side Story or Romeo and Juliet,
there is a strange theory that says that probably all of this is just a lie, and Shakespeare was a group of writers of that period.